Imagine a country where slavery was abolished 43 years ago and where 150,000 people are still enslaved today, where families force-feed daughters as young as 5 years old to make them fat enough for marriage, where 90% of the land is Sahara Desert, and the desert keeps advancing. 3 facts before we begin. 1. Mauritania ranked 3rd globally for modern slavery in 2023, behind only North Korea and Eritrea. 32 people per 1,000 still owned. 2. Up to 40% of Mauritanian women were force-fed as children, not as punishment, as preparation. 3. In 2026, 590,000 people face acute food insecurity every dry season. In a country that quotes the Quran in its constitution and calls itself an Islamic republic. This is Mauritania, a nation that abolished slavery on paper while keeping it in practice, that prays 5 times daily while selling daughters by weight, that sits on one of West Africa's largest gas reserves while its medieval cities disappear under sand. Real life in Mauritania 2026 is not what you expect. Nothing here is simple. Stay with me. Chapter 1. Hereditary Slavery. Stand at the edge of Nouakchott at 6 in the morning, where the capital spreads in every direction, featuring low concrete, sand-colored walls, the call to prayer echoing across 1.2 million people, street vendors setting up, charcoal smoke drifting in the desert wind, and men in white boo-boos walking with purpose. It looks like poverty, and in fact it is poverty. But underneath it lies something older and more deliberate. Her name is Mariam. She is 27, and she was born in a village in the Hod El Chargui region, which is in the eastern desert near the Mali border. Her mother was a servant, her grandmother was a servant, and when Mariam was 6, she was taken from her mother to work in the household of a Beidane family, the lighter-skinned Arab Berber elite that has controlled Mauritanian land and politics for centuries. She did not choose this, as her status was inherited. This is how slavery functions in Mauritania in 2026, where it relies not on chains or ships, but on inheritance. A child born to an enslaved mother becomes enslaved by birthright, with the status passing through the bloodline. The child cannot own land, cannot receive a dowry, and cannot inherit property. The economic dependency created by generations of unpaid labor was never broken because it was never meant to be. According to the Walk-Free Global Slavery Index 2023, approximately 150,000 people in Mauritania, which is 3.2% of the population, or 32 per 1,000, live in modern slavery. That places Mauritania 3rd in the world, making this not a relic, but a functioning institution in a country of 5.2 million people. The ethnic architecture is specific, with the Beidana, who are Arabic-speaking and lighter-skinned, sitting at the top. Below them are the Haratine, black Mauritanians who are direct descendants of enslaved people, now constituting roughly 40% of the country's population. Nearly 1 in 2 people you pass on the streets of Nouakchott traces their ancestry to bondage, which is the demographic reality of Mauritania right now rather than ancient history. Mauritania became the last country on earth to formally abolish slavery in 1981, though it did not criminalize it until 2007. The UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights reported in 2022 that enforcement remains weak. Victims lack access to justice due to poverty and fear of retaliation, and deep-rooted ethnic inequalities continue to sustain the practice. Although the government created anti-slavery tribunals, no one has been imprisoned for owning a person in Mauritania as of this recording, leaving the tribunals empty. Mariam was technically freed in 2018 when an NGO field worker visited her village, but she has no education, no land, and no savings. She lives in a one-room structure at the edge of a city that does not care whether she survives. And she remains free on paper, but not in practice, while the family her grandmother served still controls the land she grew up working. That is the slavery Mauritania carries into 2026, defined not by dramatic chains, but by the invisible chains of inherited poverty and a system designed to make escape impossible. But slavery does not exist alone here, because there is a force working alongside it that is eating this country from the outside in. Chapter 2: Desertification and Food Insecurity. If hereditary slavery does not define your life in Mauritania, the desert will. 90% of this country is Sahara, consisting of 1 million square kilometers of rock, sand, and heat. And the sand is advancing. Every year, the Sahara presses further south into the 10% of land where 5.2 million people try to grow food and stay alive. The International Federation of Red Cross documented that between 2000 and 2021, Mauritania ranked third among sub-Saharan African countries for the impact of climate events on human lives, resulting in more severe droughts, more frequent flash floods, and topsoil disappearing season by season. The numbers from the World Food Programme are precise and brutal, showing that in 2026, 590,000 people, which is 12% of Mauritania's entire population, face acute food insecurity during the lean season between June and September. This window is called the soudure, which is the hunger gap between when last year's grain runs out and this year's harvest begins. In Hod El Shargi, the same eastern region where Meriam was born, the WFP documented 92,800 people in crisis-level food insecurity during the 2024 lean season, where Phase 3 means uncertainty regarding the next meal, while Phase 5 means people are dying. Hod El Shargi sits only one drought away from Phase 5. The root cause is structural, as only 0.4% of Mauritania's land is suitable for agriculture. In a country the size of France, Germany, and the United Kingdom combined, you can only farm a patch roughly the size of a mid-sized city, as everything else is sand, plateau, or rock. The World Bank Human Capital Index 2024 reports that 25% of Mauritanian children suffer from stunting, with their bodies permanently damaged by early childhood malnutrition that persists long enough to alter how a child's brain and skeleton develop, leaving 1 in 4 children permanently compromised before they start school. The cruelty embedded in this crisis is that the Senegal River Valley, which is a narrow green strip along Mauritania's southern border, is some of the most fertile land in West Africa. The people who live closest to it are frequently the same people descended from enslavement, yet they do not own it, because agricultural land belongs to the Bédane elite. The people who farm it are Haratine, and the people who starve when the harvest fails are Haratine. The desert is not neutral because it is eating the land that the poorest people live on. The poverty, the slavery, and the hunger are not 3 separate crises, but the same crisis and the same system, seen from different angles. Chapter 3: LEBLOUH. Travel into the interior, past the capital and the desert settlements, into the Adrar Plateau, the Hod regions, and the pastoral communities stretching toward Mali, where the tarmac ends and tradition runs deeper than any law passed in Nouakchott or any convention signed in Geneva. This is where LEBLOUH lives. Picture a compound of 3 rooms with packed earth walls, where a girl between 5 and 9 years old sits beside her grandmother or a hired specialist called a tante, a gavage woman, with clay bowls and a wooden ladle. The bowls are full, and they do not stop being refilled. LEBLOUH is the systematic force-feeding of girls to produce extreme weight gain, beginning sometimes at age 5 and intensifying before puberty and marriage negotiations begin. The research term is gavage, which is the same French word used for force-feeding geese to produce foie gras, and it shares the same goal of maximum weight gain as fast as possible, up to 16,000 calories a day. According to UNICEF and WHO field data from Mauritania, up to 40% of women aged 20 to 49 report being force-fed as children. In a country of 5.2 million, that means hundreds of thousands of women carry this in their bodies and their memory. In a nomadic desert economy, historically subject to unpredictable starvation, a woman's body fat was a literal survival reserve. A thin woman was a poor woman, while a fat woman was seen as prosperous, fertile, and commanded a higher bride price. In a society where inheritance rights for the Haratine were non-existent, where land access was blocked, and where formal employment was a fantasy, marriage was the only available financial mechanism, and the economics of marriage rewarded weight. The gavage women are professionals who know caloric targets and timelines, and girls who resist, vomit, or push the bowl away are sometimes denied water until they comply, while some are beaten. The Mauritanian government officially prohibited LEBLOUH in 2003, but in 2026, no one has ever been prosecuted for it. The law exists, but the enforcement does not, though UNICEF field workers continue to document its practice in remote communities. The practice has declined in Nouakchott and among educated urban families, but it persists in the pastoral interior. Mauritania is a 99.9% Muslim Islamic republic, yet no verse in the Quran endorses force-feeding children. No hadith instructs fathers to overfeed daughters for marriage, and no mainstream Islamic scholar anywhere has issued a fatwa supporting LEBLOUH. Islam is not the source of this practice, but rather tradition is. It is a tradition older than Islam in these communities, characterized by scarcity economics, bodies as assets, and daughters as the only commodity a poor family could reliably accumulate and sell. The families practicing LEBLOUH are not monsters, but are desperately poor people operating inside a logic that poverty itself created. The logic is the problem, and the logic will not change until the economics that built it change first. Chapter 4. SNIM Iron Ore. Stand at Zurate, 500 kilometers from Nouakchott, deep in the Sahara, where it is 45 degrees Celsius before noon. The sky turns white with heat haze, and the horizon dissolves into rust-red rock, iron-stained earth, and the mechanical geometry of a massive industrial operation. This is where Mauritania's iron ore comes from, operated by SNIM, the Société Nationale Industrielle et Minière, which is Mauritania's state-owned mining company. In 2023, it set a production record of 14.01 million tons of iron ore. The African Development Bank confirmed that the mining sector's share of Mauritania's entire GDP rose from 18% in 2021 to 24% in 2022, proving that this country's economy runs on what is dug out of this desert. The iron ore leaves Zourat on a train that stretches up to 2.5 kilometers when fully loaded, making it one of the longest freight trains in the world, traveling 700 kilometers to the Atlantic port over 12 to 20 hours. On that train, between the iron-stained wagons, you will find people. Workers earning $300 to $500 per month cannot afford the rare private vehicle on this route, and since no passenger service exists, they climb onto the ore. They sit on iron dust, exposed to desert heat by day and near-freezing temperatures by night, with no shelter, no water, and no sanitation for 700 kilometers. The social hierarchy at the mine is not subtle, as expatriate engineers from Europe, Australia, and North America earn $3,000 to $6,000 per month in air-conditioned facilities, while Mauritanian workers earn $300 to $500 and ride the ore train. In 2024, ArcelorMittal, the world's second-largest steel producer, signed a Memorandum of Understanding with SNIM for joint green steel production, while Glencore's LEBLOUH mining operation in the same region targets 11.3 million tons per year, and the African Development Bank approved a $150 million loan to modernize the railway and double capacity by 2030. The supply chain accelerates, the ore flows out, but the wealth does not flow into the workers in the dust, the Haratine families on WFP rations, or the girls being force-fed 100 kilometers away. The country of origin disappears between the ore car and the finished product, and the worker who rode 700 kilometers in iron dust disappears with it. The iron comes out of Mauritania, but the dignity does not go back in. Chapter 5. Daily Life. Nouakchott sits at the exact intersection of the Atlantic Ocean to the west and the Sahara Desert to the east, waking up between the sea breeze and the sand haze. The Grand Marché is already moving by 7 in the morning, with fabric stalls, dried fish in the sun, and air smelling of wood smoke, cardamom, and salt. Donkey carts navigate the same lanes as Toyota pickups, and the sidewalks are deep sand, as Nouakchott was built on it, and the sand is always present in your food and in the gap between your phone and its case. You can sit at a wooden bench outside any local restaurant and order the national dish tiaboudienne, which is rice slow-cooked in tomato and fish broth, whole grilled fish, cassava, carrot, cabbage, and lime, costing 80 cents to $1 and 20 cents. For 30 cents, you can get a clay cup of zrig, which is fermented camel's milk blended with dates and salt, a drink of 10,000 years of desert survival that women carry on their heads in plastic containers and sell by the cup. For 50 cents, you can buy a handful of Tijhert dates from the Adrar Highlands, which are honey-sweet, plump, and have been produced in these same plateaus for 1,000 years. Your full breakfast costs $1.80, which is significantly cheaper than a mediocre breakfast in Paris or a bagel and coffee in New York. Getting around Nouakchott means using bush taxis, which are shared four-wheel drives running fixed routes for 15 to 30 cents, as the city has no public transit. Traffic lights in the center are treated as optional, and during the Harmattan season, visibility drops to meters as walls of Saharan dust move through the streets, forcing you to taste the desert whether you want to or not. You could spend a week in Nouakchott on $20, eating well, watching the Atlantic turn orange at sunset, while desert wind carries grit into your food, and understanding what it means to live at the edge of two worlds while belonging to neither. Chapter 6. Beauty and Resilience. If you go north 500 kilometers into the Adrar Plateau, past the tarmac and into the deep Sahara, the sand gives way to red quartzite ridges and the reshot structure. From the ground, it appears to be gentle concentric ridges and valleys, but from space, it is a perfect geometric bullseye 50 kilometers across, which the European Space Agency confirmed has served as a navigation landmark for astronauts since the earliest manned missions. NASA photographed it in March 2026 with Landsat 9, and although almost no tourist has visited it because reaching it requires 4x4 vehicles and a local guide across terrain with no roads, the reward is one of the most extraordinary landscapes on this planet. 2 hours west on the Atlantic coast lies Banque d'Arguin National Park, a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 1989 that covers 12,000 square kilometers of ocean, shallow salt flats, and desert edge. It is home to 2 to 3 million migratory waterbirds from European breeding grounds every winter, as well as bottlenose dolphins and sea turtles, and it serves as a fish nursery, sustaining coastlines from Morocco to Senegal. The Imragan fishing communities who live inside the park have worked these waters for centuries, using techniques unchanged since the medieval period, and they work alongside dolphins who drive fish to the surface. Then there is Biram Da Abed, who was born Hereditary into the community whose grandparents were owned. He built IRA Mauritania, the initiative for the resurgence of the abolitionist movement, and spent decades doing what is dangerous in this country, saying the word slavery out loud with names attached. In 2013, the United Nations awarded him the Human Rights Prize, and despite running for president, coming second, being arrested multiple times on charges that Human Rights Watch describes as fabricated, and going to prison for burning Islamic legal texts he said were being misused, he did not stop. The man born into Mauritania's most oppressed community became one of West Africa's most important human rights voices, proving that the same country that produced the conditions he is fighting also produced him. On January 1, 2025, the Greater Tortue Amayim offshore gas field produced its first gas on the Mauritania-Senegal maritime border, and the first LNG cargo shipped in April 2025. The World Bank projects 7.6% GDP growth for Mauritania in 2026, with annual gas revenues projected to exceed $1.5 billion within 5 years. The LEBLOUH field, sitting entirely within Mauritanian territorial waters, holds an estimated 80 trillion cubic feet of reserves, which is one of West Africa's largest undeveloped gas discoveries, fully controlled by Mauritania. Whether that wealth reaches the Haratine, whether it funds the schools that make LEBLOUH economically unnecessary, or whether it breaks the inherited poverty keeping 150,000 people enslaved, 2026 has not answered that yet. Mauritania was once called Africa's Forgotten Republic, but it has become one of West Africa's most paradoxical and consequential stories, because its people, the ones who have been owned, force-fed, and left to starve, refused to disappear. Chapter 7. Not Statistics, but Souls. The Mauritania You Never Knew. What you have seen in this documentary is a surface, as these are not separate facts, but the same fact seen from different angles. The hereditary slavery, the desert hunger, the force-feeding of daughters, and the iron ore that ships out and never returns are the same system that has spent centuries converting the bodies and labor of the poorest people into instruments for others. Every number in this video, including the 150,000 people enslaved by inheritance, the 590,000 facing food crisis, and the hundreds of thousands of women carrying the memory of force-feeding, is verified by sources such as the Walk-Free Global Slavery Index, World Food Program, UNICEF, World Bank, UNESCO, and Human Rights Watch. Mauritania has 5.2 million people, consisting of scholars who kept medieval Islamic manuscripts alive in desert libraries, fishermen who read Atlantic tidal patterns without instruments, and nomads who navigated one of Earth's harshest environments for 10,000 years. Mauritania doesn't need your pity, but it needs your understanding.